Will an African team ever win the World Cup?
Yeah, they will. I think it's just a matter of time.
Time?
I doubt. I doubt it would be.
You remember Pele's, prediction about 31 years ago, where he said, I think at the start of the 21st century, an African country will win the World Cup, but it's not happened yet. I mean, it's been 31 years since that prediction. It's not happening yet, but I feel that a time will come, and it's just a matter of time. I think in the next 2-3 World Cup editions, you see an African country lifting the World Cup.
You mentioned Pele made a prophecy or suggesting some 31 years ago. And the World Cup started in 1930.
Yeah.
Africa participated in 1934. Egypt. Since 1934 till 2022, you can do the math in the number of years that this competition has lingered on. But in all of this, you've still not been able to cross the quarter-final hurdle. What makes you so optimistic that we can ever win it? Because if you've not gone past the quarter-final, tasted the semi-final, to even think of going to the final and even losing the final, first of all, knowing the pain and agony of losing the final, then subsequently getting to prepare yourself mentally and psychologically for that challenge of winning it. What makes you so optimistic? Where lies this?
Why do you doubt
belief?
an African country can win the World Cup?
Because I look through Africa's records at the World Cup, and it paints to me an account of a team or a continent that is not ready to annex the global stage. There are 54 African countries, member stations or member nations of CAF. Only 13 have ever tasted the Mundial, or what we call the Holy Grail. Only 13 have actually had the opportunity to play at that particular tournament. Of the 13 that have played at that particular tournament, only Morocco, Nigeria, Algeria, Ghana, Senegal,
and
Cameroon have had the opportunity of crossing the first hurdle.
Yeah.
What's the number? 13, but we've got Cameroon, Nigeria, Algeria, Ghana, Senegal, Morocco. That's 6.
Yeah.
Only 6 of the 13 have crossed the first hurdle.
There's a reason.
I like I told you when he started, you see, Africa not going past the stages and winning the World Cup, I see it not something that is going to be probably later. I don't think it would ever happen.
It would never happen.
And my reasons are just simple. First of all, you talk about unpreparedness. The next one is that if you check recently, the teams that have won the World Cup and the star participants of the team, you will realize that either they have a direct African lineage or they have an indirect lineage. For example, I can talk of France. Even France, with their 2 World Cups that they've won, that's in '98. You could talk of Lilian Thuram, you could talk of Patrick Vieira, you could talk of Zinedine Zidane, you could talk of Yuri Djokovic. You know, Djokovic is not actually from France.
From Algeria.
So you see all of these players. If you talk about even their second time that they won, you can talk of Kante, you can talk of Mbappe, you can talk of Pogba, and you can talk of the list goes on and on and on and on. What I'm trying to say is that the first of all, unpreparedness, and the next one is that our talent have realized this inevitable truth. They realize that if they pledge their allegiance to an African country, it will be very difficult to win the greatest of all prizes. So what do? They switch allegiance. And it has happened over and over and over. You remember the last time there was something that Balotelli said, which was not really, people didn't really take it serious. But it was like, if the African countries would be very serious and decide that they would be able to keep their players, they have a chance. If you take a country like, let's say, Senegal, or you can take a country like Kenya, or a country like maybe Uganda, and you talk of the products that, or let's say Algeria, for instance, the products that have been able to naturalize for either France or either Spain, all in the name of trying to taste the honors, you realize that it is further going to cripple, or it's further going to dent our chances of ever winning. So for African nation not winning, you hardly get an European nation decide, or a person who is born an European, probably in Africa, decided to naturalize for Africa. It hardly happens, because they realize that playing for an African country is very difficult to ever win. So they would prefer staying there, even if they don't get a chance to play. That is what it's going to be. So for me, one, we don't have our players who especially are born in the diaspora deciding to come and play for their country. Two is that our system is so porous, and it is so disorganized. Because for every team that wins the World Cup, check the team's domestic league. Every team that has ever won the World Cup, only 8 teams have won the World Cup. Brazil. For nothing at all, Brazilian league is one of the best leagues in the world. Because how many of them have even won the Club World Cup? Talk of Spain, talk of England, talk of France, talk of Uruguay. Talk of Germany. You go back and you check the leagues that they are playing, so you realize that every nation that wins the league, you would at least get some of its players or its key members of the team at least coming from their local league. What happens to ours?
So Percy, this is where I disagree with both yourself and David. I am a bit surprised that there's this notion that African teams cannot win the World Cup. David spoke about the fact that if you look at the number of countries that Africa has, 55, yet just 13 have made, the World Cup. There's a reason to that. There was even a time the World Cup was invitational.
Of course.
You are handed invitation to play.
Yeah, there was even
there was even a time you had to apply.
Yeah.
The time when Egypt actually first participated, they had to apply.
That was 34.
And so there were disparities in that. Even now, you look at Europe has close to the same number of countries Africa has, thereabout. But look at the number of countries that the slot Africa has.
We have
so
5.
there is a reason to it. Europe has so many slots. Do you get it? Africa has just about 5 slots.
We have 5.
Exactly. So that is the reason why we do not have a lot of countries from Africa.
South America also has only 5.
But you see, because South America, there are not many.
And they have 5?
No, you see, that's the point.
South America has around 14.
South America has
they are only 10.
South America has just 13 countries.
No, they have 10 countries.
10 countries.
Yeah.
Yet they have 4 major slots.
5.
Now it's 5.
It's 5.
5 slots. You see that disparity.
But you see,
I'm coming.
Okay.
Let me finish. That's the disparity there. So you do not blame Africa for having a few countries representing because of the distribution. Now, let me run by you some few figures and you realize that Africa has not been that poor. Out of the 13 countries that have qualified, Nigeria has played 21 games. They've recorded 6 wins, 3 losses, 3 draws, 12 losses, scoring 30 goals and conceding 23. Cameroon has played 23 games. They have won 4. They have drawn 7. They have lost 12, conceded 18, scored 43. Ghana has played 12 games, meaning we've competed how many times? Just 4 times. Now Ghana has 3 times. Sorry, Ghana have played 12 games, won 4, lost 5, drawn 3, scored 13, conceded 16. Senegal has played 8 games, won 3, drawn 3, lost 7, scored 13, scored 19, conceded 13. If you look at this number, it gives a high percentage in terms of our performance. Mm-hmm. Now, why do I say an African team will win the World Cup? This is the reason. In the 30s, right down to the 70s, the disparity between Africa and Europe and the rest of the world was wide in terms of competition. How many African players back then were playing in Europe? In the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s? Very few. Up until a time when you had the likes of George Weah, the likes of Abedi Ayew Pelé, the likes of Roger Milla playing in France and all of that. That was somewhere around the 80s. So Africa started making a serious representation in terms of competing in Europe in the 80s. With time, if you check, gradually Africa is closing the gap in terms of the number of quality of players that play in Europe. The Ivorian golden generation, that 2006 generation that had the likes of Kolo Toure, Emmanuel Eboué, Yaya Toure,
Didier Drogba.
That squad can be compared to any solid European generation if only they had done some few things well. That Senegal 2002 World Cup generation of Kalilou Fadiga, Diop, Henry Camara, that squad, even the coach, CC and the likes, that squad can be compared to a lot of quality teams in Europe. Now, I am saying Africa would win the World Cup with just a matter of time. Is now, if you look at gradually, Africa is closing the gap. Now you look at the Senegalese team
in which sense?
In terms of the quality of players that are spread across Europe. If you look at the Senegalese team, practically all of them are playing in Europe. If not half of them, about 40% of them are consistently playing in the Champions League, Europa League, competing with these same European guys. Back then that was not the case. Back then, how many top players in Africa were competing with the likes of Ronaldo, Bebeto, Baju? You practically not speak about a lot, but now you can have even a Mo Salah who wins the best player in the Premier League. Africa is spreading its tentacles across board. There's quality spread around. The reason why Africa is lagging behind, for me, is basically about 3 reasons, and those 3, even they are covering it up. 1, player quality, and now the player quality, it is improving. You spoke about the fact that African players will not naturalize. Right now, most of these African players that are born outside or were born outside actually want to come and play for their home country
because they know they wouldn't get a chance. They know that
they won't get a chance. Look at somebody, the Nigerian team. The Nigerian team is not about they knowing that they won't get a chance. They actually want to represent Nigeria.
You don't expect that Ademola Lookman will get a chance in the English national team.
I'm coming.
You should know that.
That's the underlying fact is that there are players who are born in Europe who are of African origin who now feel a sense of pride wanting to play for Africa. All these quality are coming down. If this Nigerian team that Ghana eliminated had made this World Cup, we could speak about a certain level of quality. Now, my problem with Africa is the psychological block. We are going to the World Cup to compete. Brazil will not say they are going to the World Cup to compete. England will not say they are going to the World Cup to compete. Germany will not say they are going to the World Cup to compete. They say they are going to the World Cup to win it. Most of African countries feel getting to the quarterfinals is okay. Hey, we've not been to the semi-finals. When we get to the semi-finals, it is okay. But if you look at this generation of African players, they want to win. Samuel Eto'o speaks about there will be 2 African teams that will end up in the final, Cameroon and Morocco. That is the mental block Africa has crossed. The one thing that would become an Achilles heel to an African team not winning the World Cup is the technical ability of the managers. If you look at the managers that have taken African teams to the World Cup and have performed well, Bruno Metsu, Senegal in 2002. It was a French manager that handled the Cameroon national team, took them to the quarterfinals. It was Milovan Rajevac that handled the Ghanaian team, took them to the quarterfinals. All the African team that have crossed, that Nigerian team of 1994, that brilliant Nigerian team that was made up of Sunday Olise, Victor Ekpeba, Yakubu Yakini and all of that, it was handled by a foreign coach. The problem is that, can we get a manager who, when he pits his strength against these top managers in the world, can outwit them tactically? That is the only stumbling block or Achilles heel to an African team winning the World Cup. Because when it comes to quality of players, African teams right now are at par with most players in Europe. When it comes to, in terms of their level of mentality competing, these guys are competing with the same players week in, week out in Europe. They are there. The only bottleneck is how many African managers or coaches right now can say they can compete with Luis Enrique.
Well, beyond all of this which you mentioned, here's why I think Africa can't win the World Cup. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go back into history.
Okay.
So you look at Africa, whenever we've gotten to that point where history beckons, where the stage is set for a different narrative, the odds are stacked against you. Mm-hmm. Morocco. Let's start with Morocco. They became the very first African country to progress out of the first round. Played West Germany, held them so well in 1986, only to lose out in the 87th minute to a Lothar Matthäus strike. You go to Cameroon, 1990. Played excellently against England, only to lose by an extra time penalty. fast forward, look at 2002, Senegal. Maybe perhaps it's just karma in that particular scenario. Because no, I'm coming. But Senegal, because Senegal won by the odd goal in golden goal in the round of 16.
Of course, against Sweden, and
that's why I just said maybe Senegal just had their karma. But there's a particular team. If you look at the Black Stars, 2010,
they had the opportunity.
if you check all of the eliminations that have occurred, having missed out Nigeria in 1994, that Roberto Baggio.
Exactly.
Nigeria had held Italy.
Nigeria was one of the best teams in that tournament.
Nigeria had held Italy for 88 good minutes. If you check through, there's a theme.
So you're actually feeding into my feeding into my narrative that
the odds are stacked against you.
No, it's not about odds. It's about the mental block, because all these figures, David, you put across, brilliant. But you see, Africa has crossed that barrier. Now you have players who...
I don't think it's about a barrier,
David.
I feel it's more about the fact that in all of those scenarios, the world, the universe is practically...
David,
you are speaking mystic here. How is the universe working against you?
How be it that Morocco plays so well, and that's just at the end, just that moment,
David,
Nigeria
with all the things that...
Look at what Suarez did in 2010.
Come on.
with all the things that he was saying.
So you are looking at the universe. The universe
practically set his mind that Africa would never annex a trophy.
There was one thing
let me run by you these figures so that probably you could speak to them. In the first time an African country went to the World Cup was in 1934, which was Egypt. In 1970, the first African country to draw a game at the World Cup was Morocco. They drew 1-1 with Bulgaria. In 1974, Zaire was the first African team to finish without scoring a single goal in the World Cup. That same year, they were the first team to have the first yellow card and red card in that same tournament. In 1978, Tunisia became the first African country to win at the World Cup 3-1 against Mexico in that tournament. In 1982, that was when the more or less of Dijon, when Algeria, FIFA had to revise the rule because Algeria literally became the first African country to win twice, and yet they did not qualify. That was in 1982. Then fast forward to 1990, Cameroon became the first African team to win over a reigning champion in Argentina when they had come from the backdrop of the 86 tournament. In 1994, Nigeria also had the biggest win by an African country where they beat Bulgaria by 3-0. That's what I'm saying. That Nigerian team in 1994 was one of the best African teams to compete in a World Cup. Roger Milla of Cameroon, the oldest player to score at the World Cup at age 42 when Cameroon beat Russia. Russia won Cameroon. They beat Cameroon by 6-1. Fast forward 1998, Cameroon, the first African country to qualify to the round of 16, and the second time in the history of its participation. Then we know in 2010, Africa nearly made it to the semi-final. Virtue last minute spot kick by Asamoah Gyan. 2014.
I will not blame Jan. It was faith.
Algeria, Nigeria, the first occasion in which two African countries had qualified from the round of 16. Had never happened, but it happened in 2014.
Now,
these figures, for me, it speaks to a progression and improvement, because from 1934, realize that from that time, there has been first. Even the last time a first happened was in 2014, where two African countries qualifying from the group stages to the round of 16. There would always be a first.
Now, what you mentioned before you come in, you mentioned the fact that there's been progression.
Yeah.
But just to hit you, there's been also regression. From 86, we've had African teams successively progress from the first round. In 2018, there was none.
Because for me, I think that's why I gave you a narrative. We are battling against three things. One, the quality of players, which I think now we have all agreed that the quality on the African continent can match up to anywhere in the world, if not 90%, at least 80%, because these guys are competing with the same players practically week in, week out. Go to the French league. These African boys, Salis is competing with the likes of Neymar, and not name them, English Premier League. I mean, the African players are competing. Actually, some of them are dominating. A typical example, Mo Salah, Sadio Mane, before he bring in Hans Data Flick. You are pitching Otuado against Hans Data Flick.
Let me just.
He outwit him
now,
tactically?
you were talking about something that you said with respect to even the leagues. It was until recently that you had African players playing in the Europe and the rest.
As in the major leagues and competing at the highest level.
1930, when Uruguay won, there was not a single player who played in Europe. I'm just running by you. 1950, when Uruguay won the second time, there was not a single player who played in Europe.
How many teams competed?
I'm coming. 1958, arguably the two best players or the three best players, Garrincha, Didi, Pele, none of them was playing in Europe. I'm coming. I just want to run by you. 1962, it was still Garrincha and Didi. You take the Brazilian team, Garrincha, Didi, Mario Zagallo, and I'm coming. I want you to know that you don't need and all of the teams.
But you see,
I'm coming. You let me finish. That is 1962. 1970, the best team ever to have won the World Cup. If you start from the top, Tostão, Nelinho, I'm coming, Nelinho, you can talk of Carlos Alberto, Pele himself, you can talk of all of these players who was playing in Europe.
Maybe
I'm trying to tell. So I want you to know that they didn't need to be the best by ever played. So we can't use that as excuse.
The reason why you can use that excuse is, one, infrastructure development is lacking on the African continent. I'm coming. Infrastructure development is lacking on the African continent. Now, for some, he speaks about the universe. For some universal reason, right now, African countries can cross to Europe, have access to these infrastructure development. We don't necessarily have to build them in Africa because, one, there's availability in Europe. Right now, European teams want to even come and buy players from Africa. Back then, the best of the best players were based in South America. It's you cannot argue. The best of the best were based in South America. So that argument is null and void.
Let me tell you.
Europe even were not winning the World Cup in the 50s, and Europe were non-existent because the best players were from South America.
That one, you shouldn't be saying that, because by the first 4 World Cups, Europe had 2, South America had 2. There were only 2 winners. I'm coming. I want you to understand that. Talking about having players in Europe, South America never until 1978. That's Argentina won their first World Cup. 1978.
You're taking my argument out of context.
And I want you to know that it was Mario Kempes who were playing in Europe. You take the whole Argentine team. Now,
you're taking my argument out of context.
Okay, let me just end with this.
I'm not even emphasizing on African players playing in Europe. My point is that right now, our quality can be stuck up against the Europeans.
No problem.
Unless you're telling me I'm lying. That golden generation, that Ivorian team, that 94 Nigerian team, line up the best of the English team,
I'm not arguing,
and they can compete with them on any day, any time.
I am not arguing against that.
It's just a matter of time.
One of the major reasons which I even wanted to pin out is how we see our national teams. I'm sure you watched when all the national teams were mentioning the players that are yet to go. Brazil, who has won 5. When the list was being mentioned, even Neymar, who knew he's supposed to... I'm coming. Who knew he was supposed to go? Even he saw it as a pride to play in the national team. If you take African teams with World Cup, let's take just 2014. We could have scandals of Ghana flying money to the World Cup. I'm coming. You can talk of Cameroon. Cameroon, they had to boycott. You can talk of Benoit Sokoto and his people boycotting because of World Cup. And it's not just these two. You can talk of Ivory Coast.
Anyway, before we check out, Dave, African countries and local coaches, just 1 minute. Do you think that the local managers can break that hoodoo? A local manager taking an African team beyond the quarterfinals, beyond the semifinals? Because like I listed, none of these African teams that have made the quarterfinals have done that with a local manager. Just 1 minute each. Can local managers in this World Cup, because Senegal are coming with Cissé, Ghana is practically coming with Otuado, though he's based that he's a local manager. I still see him as a local manager.
Otuado played at the 2006 World Cup.
Yep.
he watched the World Cup from the bench. Aliou Cisse watched the World Cup from
in 2002.
In 2002, he played watched some of the games from the bench. You look at Morocco.
Even Morocco now, they are going with their former player who was at the World Cup with them. Yeah, in 1998.
He was also there.
Yeah.
All of these guys have had to taste the World Cup. All of these guys know what it means to feel near and not get so far. And that experience will change the narrative.
Yeah.
I feel this year
you can have
change what happened.
You know, every team that has won the World Cup won with a local coach. No team has won the World Cup with a foreign coach.
Maybe the universe has aligned.
So you still feel African can perform with that?
I don't think that narrative goes different with Africa. You see, we've been trying that we want to win, we want to go further with foreign coaches. Like I said, every team that has won the World Cup wins with a local coach. So why would Africa be different?
So for me,
I spoke about the universe having
for me,
to align.
For me, I disagree. I feel that, we cannot qualify or we cannot do anything better with a local manager. We need a manager.
You're talking of identity and mindset, and you're already going against it.
Yes, we need a manager who's been able to cut his sort and can compete with the best of the best. Otuado cannot pitch his tactical prowess against Hans-Dieter Flick. Come on. We can't do anything with our local managers.
Guys, it looks as though the universe will finally align. Percy pointed it out clearly. All the World Cup winning managers have actually been local nationals.
I never knew David was
Africa is going with their nationals.